Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this concluding session of what has been an extremely busy and fruitful, I hope, for everybody, number of days of this second national annual Gobeshona conference on climate change research in Bangladesh. I was just asked by one of our distinguished special guests, what's different from last year? And I would say three things are different. Firstly, we have more people participating in this one, well over 200 people over the 4 days. Secondly, when we were here last year, and the Honorable Minister was also our chief guest on that occasion, we were in the other room, the multipurpose hall. We didn't have this very nice fancy auditorium, so this is different. And thirdly, I do think the quality of the work that has been presented over the last few days from the research community has improved. I was just talking to one of our participants here who mentioned the same thing. It's not all high quality yet, but there's some very good quality, some medium quality, and very little poor quality. And so we're getting better. So having said that, I'm going to now make a presentation on the last few days, what we've been doing. I'll start with who we are and what we do, for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are and what we do. And then to tell you about what we've been doing for the last few days. And then about what we found in the research that we've been doing that is new. And then finally talk about what's going to happen next. So let me start with the question of what is Gobeshona. Gobeshona, again, for those of you who may not know, is the Bangla word for research, and it's a consortium of now 25 institutions, which is a mix of public and private universities, NGOs and government institutions, national and international research institutes, and even some private sector organizations who do research. And the objective of coming together is to share knowledge, and we have three specific objectives. The first one is to enhance the quality of the research, and I'll explain a little bit how we do that. The second one is to enhance the sharing of research results, and again I'll explain how we do that, and the conference is one of the ways we do it. And thirdly, to feed research into policies, planning, and practice in Bangladesh, but not just in Bangladesh, beyond Bangladesh as well. So what we've been doing over the last few days is we started on the 6th of January with a one-day workshop for young researchers. We got some funding very kindly given to us by USAID to develop our young researcher capacity building program. And we did a call for researchers to apply a year ago. And over the last year, we've been helping a batch of 10 of them not do research, but to improve the writing up of the research so that it can be published in international peer-reviewed journals. Our diagnosis of research in Bangladesh is that a lot of what I would call so-called research happens in Bangladesh, but it does not get published in international peer-reviewed journals, which is the hallmark of good research globally. In the global arena, it isn't good research unless you publish in an international peer-reviewed journal. Simply publishing nationally or locally does not qualify to be good research. And so a lot of research gets done in Bangladesh, but it just stays in Bangladesh and it doesn't get published in international peer-reviewed journals. So this fellowship program, this young researcher program, is to support young researchers who have done research to write it up in a manner that gets published in an international peer-reviewed journal with mentoring and support from us. And so the first batch had a year of mentoring. 10 of them have produced 10 papers. They have submitted them to journals, and we had a very good closing workshop with them. In fact, tonight at the dinner, we will award them, we will give them their certificates for completion of their work. We then, on the following day, on the 7th, we can move on, had another workshop, this time for the new batch. So we advertised again, and we have 30 good young researchers this time. We jumped from 10 to 30, but we expect that maybe half of them will survive, the other half may not. But we brought all 30 to the workshop to explain what the whole program is about. And it went very well. We hope, as I said, at least 15 of them will come through to the next stage where we will identify papers that they will write, we'll identify mentors to help them, support them, and over the next 12 months, they will get published in international peer-reviewed journals. So that's the idea. The aim is publication. There is a small honorarium attached to each of these fellowships, and it's a payment on results. If they get a paper published, they get the honorarium. They fail to publish, they don't get anything. Having made an effort is not good enough. Succeeding is what is important. So it's a results-based payment system for research production. And then from the 8th to the 11th, we had 3 days of our science conference. This is the second science conference we've had. We had a number of people presenting, both from the country Bangladesh as well as a number of international participants. Again, a difference between this year and last year is we have a much larger number, I think well over 20 international participants this year, when we had maybe about 10 last year. So that's another, I think, change from the last year. Next slide, please. And then today we had the Science Policy Dialogue Day, where we had a number of very senior officials from various government departments come and join us, and we shared with them some of the latest findings from the research community, got their feedback, and indeed have identified a few things that we will follow up with them on, which I will describe in a moment. Next. So let me move on to the second issue that I want to address, which is what's new? What have we learned since last year? And as I said, this is an annual conference, and last year, 2015, January, was the first year, it was our benchmark year. This year, 2016, is year 1. We've done 12 months. And so we are going to use this every year to measure and collectively assess the state of knowledge of Bangladesh on climate change. And hopefully go up in increments every year, learning something new that we didn't know a year before. And so we are looking for new stuff. And one of the big differences that I will highlight between last year and now is a transition that we are making in the research community, very strong transition, very self-evident transition, from doing research on the problem of climate change, how big is it, how bad is it, where are the most vulnerable, etc., which we've been doing for some time now, to the solutions to climate change. Not just how bad is the problem, but how do we solve the problem? And we have many, many papers presented this time about solutions to the problem. So we're moving very rapidly from the problem space to the solution space. And the research community is leading that move into coming up with solutions to the problems of climate change, which are many, across geographically dispersed across the country, for different socioeconomic groups, for different sectors. There are very many different kinds of problems, but in all of these cases, we are moving into researching solutions to problems and no longer just researching the problems themselves. So I'm going to highlight a few of them. The first one is that climate change is now moving from the periphery. It's no longer a standalone subject, just the Ministry of Environment or the Department of Environment are assumed to be in charge and know what to do, and the rest of us don't have to do anything, whether we're in government or not. That's changed. Everybody in Bangladesh now, across government and across stakeholders within and outside government, understand the issue of climate change, understand some part of the problem, and are now making this transition from awareness to knowledge to from problem to solution. So we're in the process of mainstreaming very, very fast. The second emerging issue is that we are now doing many, many things on adaptation. We have found an inventory of well over 100 adaptation activities in different parts of the country. Many, many different groups are doing this. We are now, as a Gobeshona, we are going to take an initiative to bring all of this together under an umbrella on adaptation technology and make the assertion that Bangladesh is emerging as the adaptation capital of the world a reality. It hasn't reached there yet, but it is something that we aim to make happen over the course of the next few years. The third, and I'm just highlighting a few of the outputs. There are many different findings and recommendations that have come up. I've cherry-picked a few of them, so to not make it too long and exhaustive. We will have the bigger list in the proceedings, which you can get access to later. So the third one that I will highlight is the fact that migration, which we had a lot of discussion about, and people are very concerned about, um, is genuinely a problem, and it's going to get worse with climate change, and we will have climate refugees and climate migrants and climate displaced people. But actually, in the longer run, for many people, particularly in the low-lying coastal area of Bangladesh, migration may be the solution, may be an adaptation. If we think of it as these people will inevitably have to leave, how can we enable them, support them, not just them, but their children, to be able to be educated and get jobs in cities, not necessarily in Dhaka, but in other cities, and then the families can move at will when they want. So assisted, enabled, supported migration as a solution to the problem of climate change, and not just looking at migrants as the forced migrants and as a problem. We're still at the very beginning of working out what that means and how we do it, but we've made this conceptual leap away from problem to solution. We see the migration issue as not just a problem, certainly is a problem, but also a solution. And then the fourth one is on the mitigation side. We are very proud to say that many presenters presented work that they have been doing, not least in IUB, the University of Civil Engineering Department, have been doing some very, very good work on solar energy panel development. But more largely across Bangladesh, particularly the efforts of IDCOG, have supported the fastest growing solar home system in the world. We now have well over 4 million solar home systems in Bangladesh, which is a successful public-private partnership driven by the government with their policies, but executed by the private sector, and involving now more of the research community, something we can all be very proud of. So even though adaptation remains the biggest issue for us, the climate change, in the climate change arena, we are not neglecting mitigation. And the solar home systems and solar energy area is one of the places where we are actually pioneering some of the best work on mitigation as well. And then the final topic that I have mentioned and picked on is a new and emerging topic, which was a very contentious issue in the Paris negotiations just a few weeks ago at the 21st Conference of Parties, which is a new and emerging topic. We used to have mitigation, then we had adaptation, and now we have a new emerging topic called loss and damage, which means what if we fail to mitigate and we fail to adapt, and there is inevitable loss and damage associated with human-induced climate change, which is now unfortunately going to be the case. How do we deal with it? For many, many years in the negotiations, the developed countries refused to talk about this. A couple of years ago in Warsaw, at the 19th Conference of Parties, we managed to successfully get them to agree to have a new structure or mechanism called the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. In Paris, they did not want to talk about it at all because they felt it's been dealt with. But we pushed for it, and successfully in the end, this was one of the issues that was resolved at the very highest political level at the very last minute on the 12th of December in Paris, that we now got a new article on loss and damage that recognizes this as something different from adaptation, which is something that the developed countries have been refusing to do. So it's on the one hand a very important topic, on the other hand a successful outcome of diplomacy from Bangladeshi diplomats together with other least developed country diplomats, persuading first the other developing countries and then the large developed countries that this was the right thing to do, and we, as I said, got a very good outcome in Paris. In terms of the research work on this, Bangladesh has been leading the work. We are doing cutting-edge research in Bangladesh, and many of the researchers I can see in the audience here are amongst these leading researchers who have provided the evidence base on which we did this successful diplomacy and got a result. So this is a new and emerging topic. We had a very good session on it, and I'll mention a few more things going forward. I think I have one more slide. Next. Okay, so where do we go from here? We have a successful Paris Agreement. We were very fortunate to have the ambassador, French ambassador, Madame Sophie Aubert, who had actually also come last year as a special guest to our Gobeshona conference, come again this year, having a successful outcome in Paris, which is what we are all very proud of. But now we have to implement it. So we had a very good session earlier today in the Science Policy Dialogue where Dr. Nurul Kader, who is one of our senior most negotiators, and Dr. Khalid Zaman, who is our chief technical negotiator, chaired a session and presented things that we need to think about doing in terms of implementing the Paris Agreement, We identified a few things that we could work together between the research community and the government on, and we will continue this dialogue. I must say that the relationship between the government and the research community and NGOs more generally is excellent when it comes to climate change, particularly when it comes to the international negotiations. We don't always see eye to eye on everything, but we do see eye to eye on most things, and we cooperate with each other. And I'm really glad to see some of our friends from government here attending this meeting as well. So there's an agenda which I won't go into detail on to implement the Paris Agreement going forward. The second one I picked up on, as I said, is the adaptation technology idea. We are planning from the Gobeshona side to set up a set of sub-centers under an umbrella adaptation center notion, and we have indeed already approached the government to offer this as a public-private partnership initiative as a South-South center on adaptation technology. So not only for ourselves, but to share it with other developing countries. And I'll also mention at this juncture the fact that, again, this is new for this year, we did not have it last year. We got some funding from UNDP and UNEP to support the participation of about 6 or 7 international participants from least developed countries, from Tanzania, from Uganda, from Nepal, and from other countries as well, this time around, to share how Bangladesh is developing its climate change research work, knowledge management work, which hopefully will feed into the national adaptation plans that they are going to be doing, part of which is about how to do knowledge management, both knowledge generation and use of that knowledge into national policy and planning. And so the idea of the South-South Technology Center is to share technologies that Bangladesh is developing with other countries, particularly other least developed countries in Asia and Africa. And we will be taking this idea forward. The third one, as I mentioned already, is the loss and damage. We will continue to do research. There is a very important decision to be made on what happens next. The Warsaw International Mechanism reports to next year's COP, COP22, which will be in Morocco in December this year. We have 11 months between now and then to deliver good research outcomes that we can then decide the next 5-year plan. So in Morocco, the current executive committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism will have to present a 5-year work program, which we hope we can contribute and help them to present, and then in Morocco have a decision on. So Morocco, COP22, will be the loss and damage work, COP. This is going to be one of the biggest issues at that COP, and we are hopefully going to be able to contribute to that. And then the third element that we picked up on, which Bangladesh has a huge amount of experience on, is community-based adaptation, both amongst the NGOs and the research community, and also within government. And we're very proud to be able to announce that we are going to host the 10th International Conference on Community-Based Adaptation in Bangladesh in April. It will be from the 21st to the 28th of April, here in this venue in IUB. We expect several hundred people from around the world. The last one was held in Kenya last April. We have 400 people from 90 countries. The way we run these events is the first 3 days, we take all the international participants out to the field, in groups of about 20. They go and spend 2 nights with the vulnerable community in the field, seeing their problems and how they're adapting, and then they come back to the capital and we have another 4 days of a conference like the one we just had on community-based adaptation in particular. We get a mix of practitioners, researchers, government, donors, etc. So it will be a major event, and I invite all of you to keep your eyes open and come to that if you want when we have it in April. And to focus the world's attention on Bangladesh, those of the world who are interested in adaptation, which is a very fast-growing cohort of people around the world. And the final one that I'll highlight here is the fact that, as I said, we've had quite a few international participants in this conference. I've mentioned a few of them. We've also had senior professors from the United States, like Timmons Roberts, who's going to be presenting the keynote, from Brown University, Tim Finan, who's just gone off to the airport to catch his flight back to the University of Arizona. And together with them and others, we have, over the course of the last few days, identified some very significant research, collaborative research work that we will take forward. So the research agenda coming out of Gobeshona 2, this second conference, is not only just national research, but international research and collaborative research with other researchers from outside the country as well. And that's one of our objectives, is to collaborate both within the country as well as outside the country. And that I think brings me to the end of my slides, but I have two more elements to share with you. One is just hot off the press. The last session that we had, I didn't have time to put it up on the slide. We had a very good session on climate finance where we had the additional secretary of ERD. The secretary was supposed to have come, but he wasn't able to make it. And we had a very good discussion around the possibility of developing in Bangladesh with ERD and supporting ERD from the research side as well as from the financial institution side to develop a climate finance transparency mechanism in Bangladesh. And I'm very pleased to say that the additional secretary thought very well of this. He's asked me to give them a firm proposal, and we will follow up with him and with the senior secretary. This is an opportunity for Bangladesh to actually pioneer transparency of climate research. It's a big issue. Tim will be talking about this at the global level, about the problems about this. It's still a problematic area. Bangladesh has an opportunity to be cutting edge in terms of developing good systems. So that, I think, is the end of my presentation. I will just end with one anecdote for those of you who follow climate change, particularly at the international negotiations, will know that the climate change, both negotiations and climate change science, generates a lot of acronyms and words, new words. You have to learn today. Guru Priya was saying that every time he goes to a conference, he has to learn new acronyms, INDCs and NAPs. Now we have CMAs, and the Paris Agreement is going to generate a whole bunch of acronyms, APA and CMA and so on. So if we, using the principle, if you can't beat them, join them, we from Bangladesh are also putting a new word into the global firmament of acronyms and jargon, which is the word Gobeshona. Internationally now, people recognize the word Gobeshona as something that's happening in Bangladesh to do with research on climate change. And for those of you who were here last year, will remember we had the keynote speaker at the closing, Professor Jean-Pascal Ipasel, the Vice Chair of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He sent a message to me at the beginning of the saying, he's very sorry he couldn't come, but good luck with Gobeshona. And that's what he has now learned the word, and I'm sure others will do so as well. So that will be our contribution to the global knowledge base on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hawk, for that lucid and succinct summary and projection of the conference. Now, it's my pleasure to request a keynote address, which will be delivered by Professor John Timmins, Roberts of Brown University. Dr. Roberts, please.
While they're setting this up, maybe I could start. Can you hear me yet? So thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I want to say I'm honored to be here, and Salima has been asking me to come to Bangladesh for several years, and finally I'm able to come, and I didn't really realize how wonderful it would be. We took a trip down to Khulna and to visit the villages and some neighborhoods in Khulna. I want to thank Saga for that amazing trip in which I and my students learned a tremendous amount about Bangladesh, about climate change, about how we're going to solve this problem, how we're going to live with this problem. You have in Bangladesh truly a dream team of people working on climate change adaptation. You have in ICAD and in BCAS the world leaders. These are people I've known for years, some of them, and some of them whose work I think is changing the world. I would just say a lot of the success in Bangladesh, and there's many people behind this. I think the formation of BCAS is an important part of this history, and then the origin of ECAD has provided this platform for tremendous sort of gathering in of people in the way that Salim is really, I think, a treasure of humanity, somebody who collaborates with more people than anybody I've ever seen anywhere in the world, and supports young people in developing their skills. So, and then the staff has been phenomenal for my visit here. So anyway, I can wax a long time, but I did want to say these two things. That it feels to me, I feel like I think more, the people who agree with me in my thinking are in this room, really in this country, more than anywhere else. So it's been almost like a homecoming, coming to somewhere I've never been before. And that really has surprised me. The other thing is, I've been really impressed with this conference and the way that in this young country, you are able to collaborate in a way that I think a lot of old countries are not able to, where you have government agencies working with civil society and academic researcher types. And it's an extraordinary, I think, opportunity to forge new solutions. So here's to you. I'm really impressed. So I was asked by Celine to speak in this, and I wanted to again also say that I'm very honored to be with this distinguished panel to finish out this great conference. So I was asked by Celine to speak about the unfinished agenda in Paris on climate finance, which I think is one of the most important parts of the negotiations that sometimes doesn't get enough attention. So I'm going to start with this big picture, and then I'll talk some about some of the ways forward that I think are important. So a lot of people have been asking since a month ago, when the climate change conference ended, exactly a month ago, was Paris a success or a failure? So I would say there are different dimensions. These are some ways in which it was a success, and some of them are very important. The multilateral process on climate change survived. I was in Bali in 2007 as a keynote speaker for UNESCO, and I sat with the UN delegation for the whole time, and they were terrified, really, that the UN system would not be up to the task of addressing climate change. And I think it almost collapsed in Bali. It damn near collapsed in Copenhagen, and the process has survived. So I think it was a success, and for countries like Bangladesh, who do not have huge amounts of geopolitical power, unfortunately, as the 8th largest population on Earth, I think that's wrong. But you need the multilateral process, and we need the multilateral process. So there's many people who should get credit for saving this process, but it's important that it's come through finally. The second part is the national pledges, these INDCs, the intended nationally determined contributions, the climate plans that Celine calls them. 188 countries submitted plans for over 95% of all global emissions. And those were, I think, a success. Right? The global warming that was expected went from 3.6 degrees Celsius to about 2.7 degrees Celsius. Is that enough? No, right? We need to stay below 2 degrees or better yet, 1.5 degrees. But it was almost 1 degree better than we were just a year ago. And I think there was important parts of that success. For example, the work of the Obama administration, especially making joint announcements with China in November of 2014, and then a series of other bilateral. There were other countries making important INDCs, these pledges, and bilateral announcements helped. But having the US and China, the two largest emitters, responsible for almost half of all global emissions, actually doing something, meant a huge deal that they sort of broke the ice, and then as it were, and then finally other countries said, well, wait a minute, we can't say that the biggest emitters are not doing anything. Another thing was these 5-year cycles that were built into the Paris agreement, which is very good because we knew it was going to be weak, not strong enough, but that it has this sort of ratchet mechanism, a global stocktake, in which countries figure out if they've done enough, and then they have to ratchet up. They have to make stronger and stronger pledges in the future. And then having this 1.5 degree goal included as an aspirational goal was a huge success for Bangladesh and other of the most vulnerable, climate vulnerable foreign countries. And that was a really remarkable surprise in which some of your people and Salim and his group were really right in the middle of that, making it happen. So I think there's two ways to look at the Paris outcome. As George Monbiot said in The Guardian, by comparison to what it could have been, it's a miracle. By comparison to what it should have been, it's a disaster. So those are pretty extreme terms, but I think both can be said. And there's a lot of people who will bring down the outcome and say it was a failure, that there's no accountability, that it's not binding, that there's no recourse if countries don't meet their pledges, these INDCs. Really, it is all built on shame and sort of making clear what you're planning to do, and then countries holding each other accountable, and civil society holding governments accountable, and governments holding each other accountable. Now it's all on us. Researchers need to be a big part of this. Far less discussed is the issue of climate finance. I'm going to spend some time on that. So there's different ways to look at outcomes and different approaches to climate change. Are we doing enough? Is it adequate? Do we have strong adequacy, or is it relatively weak? And is it an equitable solution, one that includes all the countries of the world in the process, but then especially does it leave some people doing all the work and not having caused the problem, and other countries having caused the problem and not doing any of the work? So we, in a book with Mizan Khan, Mizan is still here from North-South University, he's gone, and who just spoke in the last 2 sessions ago, I think, and David Siplett and I have a book that just came out from MIT Press called Power in a Warming World, and we lay out a series of scenarios, and we talk about this. You can have any possibility of these. You can have strong, strong, adequate outcomes which are very inequitable, but you can also have very equitable solutions which are quite weak in terms of they're actually solving the problem of climate change. So you can have exclusive action, exclusive inaction, climate justice that is sort of good on both of those criteria, or democratic dysfunction. And just looking historically, going from the UNFCCC in 1992 has great language, it's very equitable, but it didn't really get anything done. Then we moved to Kyoto, which was a little bit more effective, but was sort of not as equitable, included only about 18% of global emissions and so on. Then we had this, the Copenhagen turn, when the outcome was very weak and very unequitable, I would say, the worst of both worlds. And then now with this INDC process and this new system that's developed with Paris and this year of pledging, we're getting towards better adequacy, right? The expected warming is going down. In that book, we talk a lot about this sort of pivot in Copenhagen. This is the key moment in the green room when the leaders of the Brazil, South Africa, India, and China group met with actually Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton burst into the room, and the 5 countries together drafted this new agreement. And we call it a neoliberal environmentalism that is basically entirely based on flexibility and voluntarism, no sort of global budget for how much we can put in the atmosphere, and then dividing it up fairly, but rather a system entirely based on sort of a shared irresponsibility, because we're rather critical of it. And we're trying to figure out why the developing countries accepted that deal in Copenhagen, and then when it was brought into the UN system the next year in Cancun. And we talk a lot about climate finance as being part of that. It was sort of a negotiated consent. So in Copenhagen, I mentioned this in the last session, the $30 billion was pledged in fast start finance, and then to scale up to $100 billion a year, jointly mobilized by 2020. And it was private and public, grants and loans, and a lot of other sort of wiggle words in there too. So then it was brought into the system in the Cancun agreements, where the multilateral system was saved partly by the great leadership of Mexico, the Mexican delegation. Here's the G77 leader in Copenhagen, Stanislaw Dieping, talking about how this aid was not enough to buy coffins for everyone who will die because of climate change. In other words, this amount of funding that was offered was really seen as not adequate indeed. So there's two parts of the deal in Paris, as has been discussed some earlier today in a nice review by Deval Kadir from the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. The Paris Agreement, which is the sort of long-term main document, and then there's this decision text, right, which is how this agreement will actually come to be. Now it's much more short-term. So my question is sort of for the rest of this talk is, where's the finance? What happened to finance? The reference to the $100 billion is gone in the main text. And one would search for clarity, and it often refers back to the convention, the UN Framework Convention. And one would look in the convention for any clarity on amounts of climate finance, and you would search in vain. So, in the negotiations, and this is a session actually I think was chaired by Salim about the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the developed countries justified the omission of the $100 billion by 2020 pledge by the fact that including binding targets would have made it necessary for the U.S. Senate to ratify the agreement, which would make it impossible for the Obama administration to support the deal. So it was a case of unnecessary ambiguity and avoiding anything that would be difficult for the U.S. This is what Robert Putnam calls a two-level game, where countries with a very narrow set of possible outcomes that they can accept back home come and have a very high level of leverage in the negotiations, I think disproportionate. There was a phrase in the agreement text. The agreement text said only that such mobilization of climate finance should represent a progression beyond previous efforts. So people think that should be above the promised $100 billion. The phrase that did come in the decision text, this again weaker part of the agreement, was that there should be $100 billion maintained through 2025. So it's been pushed back longer, right? Developing countries thought that we would go past the $100 billion immediately in 2020, and then instead it's been pushed back another 5 years. So it's been seen as sort of a weaker floor, or a ceiling rather, for 20 through 2025. So then we asked the question, how much is needed? A compilation showed that about $3.5 trillion was listed in these national climate plans, the INDCs, showing that countries really need piles of money. And a lot of the debate in Paris was about how to mobilize the trillions, how to get the private sector investing in the area of climate change. So as I talked about in the last session, and my apologies for the repeat, I know there's a lot of new people here, but one of the issues that I think is critically important is that we still lack a definition of what counts as climate finance. There needs to be at least some agreed definition so that when promises are made, we know when they've been met. and that the promises continue to have an impact if they are important for this negotiation process, which they appear to be very important. And these debates continue, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Here it is. The Indian delegation raised in the first week of the negotiations the issue of a report from the OECD claiming that that report was highly exaggerated. In the last session, I reviewed some of the numbers which the OECD showed. OECD and the Climate Policy Initiative suggested that 52 billion was delivered in 2013 and 62 billion in 2014, suggesting that we're well on our way. And the Indian delegation released this. So this is the original, the OECD report on the left, and then on the right is the Indian Ministry of Finance released this report from their climate change finance unit, arguing that credible facts were needed, and instead of 62 billion, they said that about maybe 2 or 3 billion is all that's being delivered. That all the other funds may be just simply relabeled or not really climate finance. So here we have extremely polarized positions of either 62 billion or 2 billion. So moving on, there was some wording in the decision text saying that it called for the development under the UNFCCC of modalities, another strange word, to account for financial resources provided to developing countries. So this is slated to be in the decision to be considered by negotiators by November 2018. So this, I think, is where we're going to get finally a definition of what counts as climate finance in November 2018. So we have sort of what I've described in a number of blog postings as the Wild West of climate finance accounting. And so we have 3 more years of the Wild West of climate finance accounting. And it's just supposed to be considered in 2018. It doesn't say that it's going to be resolved. So I think this is one of the reasons why climate finance is the unfinished agenda from Paris. And then another thing is that, is it new additional? Is the funding really in addition to what has been delivered in the past? We want to make sure that the development needs of countries are still being funded in the way they were before, that the money is not being siphoned off to just for climate change. Okay. There's no reference to innovative finance sources in the agreement, and those might be, in fact, the key to this problem, that is finding sources that are stable, that are that really truly new and truly additional to existing foreign assistance. Those might be things like taxes on aviation, a passenger levy of 5 or 10 euros or dollars per flight, international flight. Fees on shipping from what are called bunker fuels, right, for ships, which are now not taxed anywhere in the system. A tiny levy on international currency transactions, a global carbon tax. You get the idea, but we need to think in new ways and raise revenue. The other important thing about these funds is that they do not flow through national treasuries. They would flow directly to an international agency, so they would not be, a national government would not be in the position of deciding whether to fund climate change overseas or police, firefighters, and teachers at home, which is a very difficult position for them to be. Just coming to the last issue here is the elephant in the room, which is liability and compensation for the impacts of climate change. This is a photograph from Typhoon Nargis hitting Myanmar, a disaster that's hardly even known in the United States, 138,000 people killed. That it sort of haunts me anyway when I think about that happening, and I know this has happened in Bangladesh's history, and you all have made huge progress in avoiding those kind of deaths now. But to say that, the question is what's happening with loss and damage, and Salim has mentioned this sort of 5-year work plan that will be developed through this year and proposed next year. It looks like insurance will be part of it. That's quite interesting. I think I don't have time really to talk much about it, but it does then sort of buffer both the impacted communities and the wealthy countries from the worst of this, having these instruments set up to provide compensation through some kind of insurance. One bit of positive news is on finance is the sort of working out this agreement that new contributors like China, Brazil, Korea, Kuwait, and so on, who are already giving funding to other developing countries, will be allowed to or are encouraged to help developing countries in their efforts to curb emissions and build climate-resilient societies. And of course, China's already pledged $3.1 billion to climate-related efforts. They didn't want to be forced to do so, so the wording is very careful. I would say one thing that's really quite important and still needs attention is the need for public and grant-based adaptation funding. That is, we can't expect the private sector to come in and really address the needs of the world's most vulnerable societies and communities because there may not be much money to be made there. There might, there may not be, but it's not a system to expect it to be addressed. There needs to be, of course, also funding to avoid emissions to stay, if we're going to stay under this 1.5 degree goal. So a lot of funding is going to be needed, trillions more. In the last session, we talked, so we mentioned a lot about this issue of transparency and trust and why it's important. This is our report from Adaptation Watch, which was critical of the OECD numbers and was actually referenced in the Indian comments. It's a very complex system that delivers climate finance. I talked in the last session also about how we need to empower the existing standing committee. We need to agree and enforce the definition of climate finance. We need to create a rigorous review system, find the funding, map the projects, put them on the web, put the data on the web, and we can have a quantum leap in agencies coordinate and get this effect. So I think there needs to be a burden sharing formula for providing climate finance. You can see there's a lot of issues here. This one, this is the civil society who did a review of how equitable efforts, and this might be one way in which you might say, okay, if you're not meeting your historical responsibility in terms of emissions reductions, then you should be at the front of the contributors. You should be contributing more to help the developing countries reduce their emissions or avoid emissions. I think quite inadequate down the road. The $100 billion goal seems to be uncertain and lost. We had this dispute between India and the OECD, which reflects the need desperately really to come up with an adequate and clear definition of funding. We need to identify the sources for that funding, how, innovative funding sources. We need to figure out how to share the burden. We need to account for it, we need to track it, we need to evaluate it, so we need a real system for climate finance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for that thought-provoking and illuminating presentation. May I now request the Chargé d'Affaires of the High Commission of Canada, Mr. Christian Tardy, to say a few words.
Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Anwar Hossain Monjou, Mr. Sabir Hossain Chowdhury, Member of Parliament, Professor Mahatman, Vice Chancellor, Mr. Carl Worcester, Deputy Director at USA Economic Growth, Dr. Hoffman, Executive Director of the Daniel Center for Advanced Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege for me to join you at the concluding session of the second annual Gobeshona Conference on Climate Change. I'd like to thank ICCAD and the IUB for inviting me as one of these special guests. We know that climate change represents a challenge that is massive in scope, and I think really we're at the level now where the thing that should really interest us is doing something about it. And my colleagues who participated in some of your sessions have shared with me the outcomes of the sessions and have conveyed the high quality research that has been presented. Key findings will be of interest not only to the Canadian mission, but also to our capital continues to make global. I have an echo. There it goes. So some of the findings. I think what we've heard was that the incorporation of indigenous knowledge, if I can call it like this, local planning, women empowerment in union disaster management committees, waste management at the urban and rural community levels. All of these ideas to discuss, I think, will become part of the larger dialogue on responses to climate change. As for ourselves, the Canadian government, Canada recently participated in the Paris COP21. Our new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, outlined the principle that Canada's action on climate change is based on the scientific evidence and advice, and pledged also $2.65 billion Canadian dollars to support developing countries to transition to low carbon economies. The funding and support, among others, Least Developed Countries Fund, the Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems, the G7 Initiative on Climate Risk Insurance, and the G7 African Renewable Energy Initiative. Bangladesh is already spending a significant portion of its GDP on climate adaptation purposes. However, these national efforts will also need additional international funds. And I think it's important to reflect on the lessons learned from the engagement of donors in other sectors along with the government of Bangladesh as we think about more funds coming into the sector. The country has already shown that it is able to achieve significant results, as it has done, for example, in the health and education sectors, where several of the MDGs have been met, which is very impressive. However, perhaps one of the lessons is that the governance structures could have been strengthened at a faster pace to keep pace really with the expanding programs. And I think that in order for Bangladesh to secure what I would call its just share of international funds to come, I would think that it would be important for the financial and audit systems to be put in place, along with a robust monitoring system. And I think in this light, civil society, NGOs, universities, think tanks have all a role to play to ensure the follow-through on transparency and accountability that will hold diverse institutions who receive these funds to account. So this is a historic moment for the world and Bangladesh to harness innovative ideas and global commitments to overcome the negative impact of climate change that create insecurities for food, water, property, livelihoods. And well, I encourage you all to follow through the findings discussed here during Gobeshona and apply them now. So good luck and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your insight on these issues, Ms. Murray. It is now my privilege to request the Honourable Sabar Hussain Chaudhry, MP, and President of the Government of Parliamentary Union to kindly give his speech. Mr. Chaudhry, please.
Thank you very much. And as my luck will have it, I'm asked to speak just as the coffee comes to the table. So, a very good afternoon to all of you, and wish to acknowledge the chair for this session, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of this really impressive university, at least in terms of the facilities that I've seen. And it's difficult to imagine that we are in Bangladesh, in a venue of such impressiveness. Thank you to the organizers. I'm of course delighted to be here with the Honorable Minister for Environment. And I think he can rightly take credit for the skill and the commitment of the Bangladesh delegation that was in COP21. And I would like to congratulate him for that. I think it was a global success, and it was good to see Bangladesh playing a very important role. Of course, we have got Dr. Salim Al, Dr. Latif Rahman, and all the other experts. And it's also very good to see individuals that have been interacting since COP15 in Paris, in Copenhagen, when we first talked about the 1.5 degree Celsius cap, which has now found its way into the agreement. Let me, without being too long, just focus on a few aspects which I think might be useful as we move forward with this very important venture. The challenge, of course, as with all research, is how do you translate research into action? And this has now become even more of an important question because we know climate change is something which has not just moved from the periphery to the mainstream, as Dr. Salim Al said, in terms of attention governments pay, but also in terms of the centrality of climate change in the entire development discourse. I think this is becoming huge. Even if we talk in terms of Bangladesh, we have had events in the past which were categorized in terms of low impact, high frequency. So maybe a tidal wave or a tsunami would, a very major typhoon would hit us once every 10 years. And then we had the other extreme, which was high frequency, low impact. Flooding takes place all of the time, but the impact is limited. Now, in fact, we are looking at a new norm, which is high impact, high frequency. So events that would occur once every 10 years are now going to happen every 2 or 3 years. And if we talk about sustainable development, well, that goes out of the window if we don't get climate right. And I think the challenge for policymakers as well as those who are doing research is how can we find synergy between the 3 international processes that governments have signed up to in the last year. So we have had the Sendai framework for risk reduction, we have had the sustainable development goals, and we have climate change. So the first question is, do we also integrate research covering these 3 areas, or do we take a standalone compartment-wise approach? I think that's something that you need to look at. Obviously, in terms of avoiding duplication, fragmentation, if we can integrate, it means a more efficient use of resources that we have. So I think this is one of the major points. But then there are 3 challenges when it comes to research, and I will quickly run through them. The first is there is a disconnect between research and policy. There's a complete disconnect in that the policymakers don't take into account the research that is being done. If there is no disconnect, let us assume that there is a connection, there is a mismatch in terms of what policymakers require and what the researchers are delivering. So you've got the issue of disconnect, you've got the issue of mismatch. Even if you address these 2 issues, the challenge of articulation and communication comes in. Scientists, unfortunately, are not blessed with the eloquence of poets. So how do you get across the message in a language which the policymakers are going to be able to understand? So I think this is something which is really very, very critical. So what research, what is the demand for the research, and is it what policymakers are actually looking for? I think that has to be a huge, simple question that you do. I've talked about the integration of research, and let me just give you one example. 80% of the climate events are linked, or rather 80% of disasters, in fact, are related to climate events. Now, one natural disaster can put a country back 10 years, 15 years. So you can easily see the linkage between risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development. And when you're talking about funding of research, one of course is the issue of financial transparency. But the other is where do you get the funds? Who is going to fund the research? So I think here again, there is a very strong case for integration. And now what I will say is, as a country, given our size, I think it was mentioned that we are the 8th largest population in the world, Bangladesh has. In terms of our economy, it continues to grow. Our exports are now going all over the place. Our per capita income has gone up from $400 to almost $1,300. Per capita, we are almost $2,000. So what is the footprint that Bangladesh has internationally? How can we be a better global citizen? We have done remarkably well when it comes to peacekeeping. We have had great successes when it comes to microcredit, the MDGs, all very successful. But where are we when it comes to research? And I think that is a question for the government of Bangladesh to ask. Because if we really want to have our international presence held, I think this is one area where we can do so very effectively. We are in the front line of climate change. We have a wonderful story to tell in terms of the successes that we have had. So let us try to leverage this. Let us get our names in scientific publications which are recognized and respected internationally. I think that is what Gobeshona is going towards. And I think that is certainly a very welcome development, whether you be a parliamentarian or a minister in the government. I wish you well in your journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for your illuminating discourse. I would now like to request Dr. Carl Booster, Deputy Director, Economic Growth and Environment, USAID, Bangladesh, to speak. Dr. Booster, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be able to speak at the opening and the closing of the Gobeshona conference. I want to really congratulate ICAD, IUB, Salim, and others on a really fantastic conference. There's been a wealth of information exchange, a lot of very, very interesting discussions had. So I think it's been a very successful second Gobeshona conference. So I congratulate you on that right away. Trying to think about some type of story to connect climate change to personal experiences that I've had, and coming from the United States, it's often hard to understand all of the challenges that Bangladesh faces. U.S. is huge, population pressure isn't nearly as great, and we see impacts here and there, but nothing like you see in Bangladesh. When my parents came here to visit myself and my family last February, they live in the western U.S. There's maybe in Montana, there's like 1 million people, which is hard to imagine in that space. And they came here and they see people on people on people, 160 million people crammed into the space the size of Iowa. And then they hear me talk about and explain some of the work that we're doing in USAID around addressing the impacts of climate change, whether it be with NGOs, universities, and the government, and they find it hard to believe that people still are here. That there are so many challenges, there are so many issues, that it's just amazing that folks can survive in such an environment, and they've been not only surviving, but flourishing for food security, for health. As population grows, as the economy grows, Bangladesh has been succeeding. And what they saw and what kind of we talked about was it comes down to the resiliency of the Bangladeshi people to see these problems, and Salim mentioned moving from problems to solutions, to see these problems of the impacts of climate change, and now to move from acknowledging, analyzing, and planning for problems, but to moving towards solutions. And I think this Gobeshona conference is a great start to getting towards those solutions, to looking at innovative research, to working with students, with faculty, within a variety of places in Bangladesh, at IUB and other places, to come up with ways to solve the problems that climate change will be bringing towards to Bangladesh and how it has impacted Bangladesh. So for me, this is really important that Gobeshona has created a foundation and will continue to build upon that foundation for researchers, for students, and then ultimately to take that information and translate it into something that policymakers can use and to communicate with them. And that's where I see all of this going. And I think folks at ICAD and Celine in particular are really leading the charge, so I commend you for that. With that, I want to again congratulate the organizers of the conference, thank the panel here for taking time to talk, particularly to the minister, and say that I'm looking forward to the third conference next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Musa, for sharing your thoughts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to now request the Honorable Honorable Senonju, MP, Minister of Environment and Forests, for the deep and abiding interest in climate change adjustments and development to please deliver his address. Mr. Minister, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry. Since the time I became environment minister, I've been learning. And when I was in the school, I was told that there is no end of knowledge. And I really, now, in this time of my life, I realize it. I have worked for about 30 years in development ministries, like energy and communications. And then, when this time our Prime Minister chose to put me in this very complicated subject, I was wondering at the beginning what was her judgment. Probably one of the reasons was that she thought that whatever I am saying nobody will understand. So one of the criteria, because in these big conferences like Paris, COP21, or any other international conferences, different people say different things. And at the beginning, you have the impression that you are not going to come to an agreement and some kind of consensus. The world was kind of in a struggling mood. A developing country, and when I became the environment minister, everybody wanted me to fight. And I was wondering with whom I should fight. And about what? And I, as a student of international relations and negotiations, this is not the way to get what you want to get. And this climate change is not a particular problem of a particular country. It is a global issue. That's the difference between climate change and poverty alleviations. Poverty alleviations, few countries. But climate change, it affects everybody. If it affects Bangladesh, it affects the United States of America as well. My friend from the West tried to scare me by saying that, look, if the water rises by another meter, you go under the water. I said, yes, so do you. California will go down, Florida will go down, even Washington DC will go down. So let us not fight, let us not argue, let us put our heads together. And as regards to the finance, the person who I very affectionately look upon, Sabir Chaudhary, was saying, our GDP is increasing, our per capita income is increasing, and we accept this challenge that $5 billion worth of bridge we can build with our own money. So we have to sit down and really wonder that how much really we attach importance to this climate change as regards to Bangladesh. There is a quiet revolution going on in Bangladesh. Move around like me for 15 years, all over Bangladesh, and you will see the Bangladesh you are reading, the movies that you are watching, that Bangladesh do not anymore exist. Can you imagine how many cyclone centers we are building? Can you imagine that how many primary and middle schools we are building in a way that water rises, then building do not go down, and people can go there and take shelter. So, as kind of, that I agree with the Prime Minister's attitude, we don't go anywhere anymore for money. Money will come. You see, when I was young in the college, I had seen one advertisement. You work and make the money work. The first person wanted me to work. Money is not a problem. A lot of people had laughed when President late President Rahman first said this thing. But economically speaking, this is an economic terms. You got to know what you got to know. And once you know what you got to do, money will come. Either you can borrow or you can spend from your own pocket. The third world countries, those days are gone. The world is transforming. The developing countries are no more developing. It is already knocking at the door of developed countries. Now, let us define this development. That is also the point. But anyway, we cannot think isolatedly. We are the part of the civil universe, and we all have to agree to save this planet and leave this planet livable for us. As Carl was saying, why are so many people squeezing in? No, we'll invade America. You see? We'll go there. Already about hundreds of thousands of people are scattered all over the world. When I was studying, can I tell you a story? Of course. In the United States, there was a very kind lady in the State Department. She was also there in Bangladesh. So she used to sometimes take us out for a drive. And one day, as we were coming back from Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C., she said, "Man, look, I know you are going to run your country. What do you expect from America?" Well, nothing. I immediately, spontaneously said, "Nothing." And she said, "But how do you manage?" I said, "No. I'll ask every country like yours to take 100,000 people every year from Bangladesh." And I will not say how she had replied. But anyway, that's a good lesson. And when I was coming back from Paris, I was wondering, when I go back to Bangladesh, immediately my friends, my colleagues in the government, excepting Bari, the Prime Minister, will ask, "What are you doing? What did you get? Where is the money?" They say, we measure our success or failure in terms of how much did we get. We had not gone for money. We had gone there to share our concern. This fundamental thing has to be clear. We had not talked as an individual. We had talked in groups. So therefore, the question of getting money does not arise. If Washington DC has to be saved, then Dhaka has to be saved as well. And I definitely thank the organizers that I'm still learning and I'm not a bad learner and I'll be learning more, whether I'm in this portfolio or not, or whether in any portfolio at all. But this is a good experience for me, that how to share the concern, how to share the problem. The days of giving money through the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and IMF, etc., next and bilateral and other things, are going to sort of evade. Now we want to talk on equal terms. Money will come with knowledge, money will come with technology. It's not only money alone. So we have to create an environment globally that we share the concern, we share the technology, we share the knowledge, and that, well, I don't think Bengalis will lag behind in research and findings. With very little or almost no money in comparison to many developed countries. Well, in research, we do give money in our limited way. And another thing that everybody wants to help us. The government is wanting to help the people. The NGOs are trying to help the government. The civil society help the government. Now I have to find out which one I pick up. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your words of encouragement and insight. Now I'd like to request the distinguished Executive Director of BICAS, Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, Dr. Afiq Rahman, please to deliver his concluding remarks. Dr. Rahman.
Honorable Minister, friends on the podium, friends, ladies and gentlemen, this is the, you believe this is the last talk. So, Gobeshona, now it's Gobeshona 2. We hope in years to come, we see Gobeshona end many years later. From Gobeshona 1 to Gobeshona 2, it has been a tremendous progress. Lots of subject areas have been covered, lot of interest, and what in the generation who have been presenting papers across. Quality varies, very good to beginners research. Nonetheless, they all add up to a future of research which is quite bright. People have brought conceptual issues and experimental or experiential issues in the last 4 or 5 days here. We have been talking about capacity building. That is essentially capacity building. 30 years ago, when Salim and I started climate change, we were, if not declared mad, but people were chuckling. What is this? Some issue that will come later in the future, which may not have any basis. Our problem right now is poverty. Let's attack that. And we said, yes, we will attack poverty. We are attacking poverty. If climate change comes through, then many of the efforts of poverty that is being done will be undermined by the severe impacts that poverty, that climate change will bring. And now it is no surprise that climate poverty linkage becomes one of the most serious issues of research and thinking. And obviously, if you look at the 7th five-year plan, that becomes one of the central planks of our 7th five-year plan. Not only us, I was in India 5 days ago. They're seriously thinking how to integrate climate change even in the industrial research and industrial processes. So progress as it demands, climate change is no more an isolated issue. It's central, cross-cutting, integrative, and that's how we have to look at it. As parliamentarian Saber has said, integration is a must. the three key forces: the Sendai process in the global system, disaster risk reduction, the SDGs, and the Rio process follow-up from MDG, Millennium Development Goal to Sustainable Development Goal, where number 13 in Sustainable Development Goal was climate change, and it has been left at that point, saying subjected to what comes out from Paris. As we heard, Paris has mention of everything, committed action of not much. So that's where we are. But nonetheless, we must make it happen. It is in our own interest that we make it happen. Here, the interests of the United States or Bangladesh are not different. As is often said, the cliche, this is one planet and there is no plan B for our planet. The nearest planet that we have found, which have some possibility of habitation, is 14,000 light years away. That's a bit of a distance. So, we are stuck here and we have to live here and our generation has to grow. What we do and who we are is counted by what output we give for ourselves and our next generation. Research is the way forward towards the life of the next generation and how to guide them. On climate change, in the early days, mitigation was must, and that led to Kyoto Protocol. Not much mitigation, about 5% of 1990 level by the year 2012. Unfortunately, most of the advanced countries walked out of it, led by USA, Canada, Japan, Russia. One by one, they walked away from Kyoto Protocol quickly. You know, the excitement of Kyoto Protocol was 10 times that of the excitement of Paris. Because by Paris, people have grown up. Even the younger generation was suspicious. In Kyoto, we were the younger generation, we were not suspicious. We said, it must happen. When somebody says something, they do it. We didn't realize that somebody said something and walk away later. So there is a whole issue of climate change now is the issue of global justice. Climate justice becomes the central issue and has become the central issue. The failure of mitigation has increased the need for adaptation. And we have not paid, the global has not paid enough for adaptation. That has forced us to think, discuss, and find out loss and damage. And as we know, they tried to put loss and damage under the carpet. And in Cancun, the voice of migration came out big. And now migration is a reality. Migration is not something one wants to do. Our research in Bangladesh shows nobody wants to migrate. You ask anybody, they will tell you, we don't want to go anywhere, living in our own village. You ask people who have migrated in the slums of Dhaka, ask them, where is your home? They will tell about the island, the Jordan that they have left 25 years ago. They will never mention that place. They have migrated. We have done a short evaluation of the quality of life one gets from where they are left to the slums of Dhaka or other places, with two indicators. One, how long does a child play or smile? How long does a child play or smile in those two situations? In the villages they were in the slums they are. And the second parameter is how many people turn up in your funeral. So two indicators, one on innocent child's behavior, the other on your evaluation by the society, how important or significant you were. In both, the slums get defeated. So migration is not an easy option. And yet people do migrate. That will happen, the process will continue. We have seen some early sliver of migration going on in Mediterranean in the last 6 months to 1 year. It is not fun. The whole European Union's nation states identity was in crisis. They didn't know who was European, whether they will remain. They had Schengen Treaty. The Schengen Treaty is trembling now. They are putting borders between Schengen and countries so that people cannot move. Now that is just the beginning. Migration will become, according to IPCC Court Assessment Report, 300 million people by end of the century. According to our calculation, it will happen by 2075, 2070. And in another 10 to 15 years, big migration will start. So either climate is managed well, migration is at the same time is managed well. If not, we are going into territories like we have never seen before. There is no UN institution or international mechanism that can handle migration now at the level what happened in Europe, and the 10 times that level and 100 times that level that will happen in the decades to come. That will question the whole existence of nation states as we know it today. So climate change is at one level, few mitigation, few electric bulbs, few solar panels. At the other level, millions of people and their lives and livelihoods, their parental home and where do they go. That is the frightening part. The good part is what has been happening. We have had the privilege of starting the solar photovoltaic household systems. And to cut the long story short, we started this in an island called Korimpur, not far from Narsingh, in the middle of the Sitalanka. And we did 1,000 households with different electrical systems to study what people want. We had a whole grid system as well. Every mosque, school, hospital in that area was electrified by solar. Every house, 1,000 households were. We started studying, and by the time things started getting, that was a tide age project. Distilled water was imported, batteries were imported. We throw them out. We said we don't need distilled water imported. We can have that. We can have our own battery. And very soon the people started liking the solar energy panels, the light in the evening. Before every election, the politician would bring humbugs, the poles to show the people electricity is coming. And they say, oh, we don't want this electricity. The solar electricity, local people call Choto Vidyut, little electricity. And they wanted big ball Vidyut, the main thing, but main thing wouldn't come. So they started liking it, using it, and we started learning. Before we knew, the project was over, 3 years had gone, and the executive engineer who never wanted to come to the project said, this is the end of the project. And we said, we haven't learned anything. And our grand gurus of development at that time told us that do not impose any technology on the poor which has additional risks. Poor are saturated with risks. Do not add risks in their lifestyle by technologies that you want to create. So we started learning. The project was over. My organization and colleagues had to pay for 5 years to learn what was going on so that we get it right, rather than get it fast. By getting it right, today there are 4 million households that is now in the market system. But the market people will not invest that sort of money in getting the project user-friendly. They will be more interested in the profit than in the investment of making it user-friendly. So, lessons to be learned, there are projects going on. Very recently, we came across a technology more or less evolved by the people themselves. What they do is they take the waste cotton from the garment industries and then make a quilt out of it. A quilt which fits around the pot of rice. And what they do is put the rice pot parboiled, half boiled, just cooked, not too much gas gone or cooked gone, and they wrap it up, close it, go to their office in the garment industry, women come back, the rice is ready with the heat that is contained in the container. So with 1/3 of the heating, the rice is ready and remains warm, and the women come and get a meal out there. So technology is moving. But we have to work hard. We have to get our research done. So at the level of conceptual research, at the level of functional research, at the level of delivery. As to the policies, this is a different research, science for policy. And lot has been done in Bangladesh. Tremendous amount of progress has been made in the area of policy. Policy research you have to do, policy you have to develop, policy you have to go and give it to the government, and various agencies convince them they can run with it, they have to be confident with it, and that policy has to be beyond reasonable doubt. And to get a policy beyond reasonable doubt, the science must be even more firm. So there is a lot of research that we need to do. Gobeshona must continue, will continue. And young researchers are the way to the forward, but there is no Bangladesh research and American research of quality. There is only world quality of research. We must meet that world quality of research with high quality and high numbers. So our quality and quantity must increase, and we are in that right direction. This experimental Gobeshona, which started as a small initiative, now has grown much bigger. The students are interested. It so happens that there has been a coincidence of the Gobeshona increasing to the number of public universities and private universities increasing. So, lot of young researchers, and of course, they want to make careers not only in Bangladesh but across the world. By doing good research, that gives us opportunity to do so. We have the pleasure and fortune of recommending students for international universities for good scholarship and good opportunity. That can only happen when young people do good research. One of the limitations of good research is having good supervisors. We, that generation, we have to be better as well. Just can't give it to the students. And honestly, there has been, out of 3 institutional approaches we have tried, 2 institutional evaluations have said the supervisors are not good enough. Now that doesn't help build field institutions. So we as supervisors, guiding research, must improve our own quality, hard work through collaboration across the world, and lots of collaborations are possible. Bangladesh, I wrote recently in August and 1st of January, Bangladesh name itself in climate change. Bangladesh, a lot of people want to do and are interested in what we are doing. They're looking to it. We may not be able to be champions of mitigation, though there are important opportunities, as I said. But adaptation is our forte. Bangladesh is the capital of adaptation. We'll continue to do so. Community-based adaptation conference forthcoming is another stop. But these are posts in a long journey. And we are in the second year of that long journey as far as Gobeshona goes. We are grateful to all of you for coming and joining us here. We are grateful to all the volunteers and everybody who has done splendid work in organizing everything. Those who provided the food, that was very good. So everything went rather smoothly. And thanks for being here and sharing with us the few days of your time. We appreciate that and we are grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rahman, for your observation and kind words. Now it's my pleasure to request Professor Omar Rahman, Vice Chancellor of the Independent University of Bangladesh, to kindly give his address. Professor Rahman.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. So much to say in so little time, but I'm acutely aware that I'm between dinner and my speech, so I'll try to be very brief. First of all, I want to start off by saying that it's really an honor and privilege for me to close out this wonderful, is it 5 days or is it 4 days? 5-day event, which is the second of its kind, the second yearly annual Gobeshona conference, which we at Independent University of Bangladesh are very, very proud to sponsor and host. In many ways, Gobeshona is emblematic and an exemplar of what this university is all about, which is about research and global partnerships. And Gobeshona exemplifies in its particular area, which is climate change, those ideals which the university was founded on and which the university is propagating and sustaining. I want to thank our board of trustees for their vision and their commitment to what is in many ways was a radical idea that a university should be about knowledge generation and not about just knowledge transfer. This is quite well accepted internationally, but when this university started in Bangladesh, this was not the case. And even now, I think that we are somewhat special in terms of, as an institution, that we put so much emphasis on research and global partnerships. One of the nice things about coming last is that you get to pick the brains of all the eloquent speakers who have gone before, and I'm going to take a leaf out of Sagarozai Chaudhry's wonderful comments about research, and he actually, I think, summarized it very, very eloquently. And he talked about 3 points. He talked about a disconnect between research and policy. He talked about what was the second point? A mismatch. A disconnect, a mismatch, and a problem with articulation. And I totally agree. As someone who spent most of my life doing research, and as a part-time administrator and a full-time researcher, I think this is exactly the right analysis. But let me suggest to you why I think this happens, and I think it's important that we have some notion of the different worlds that researchers and policymakers inhabit. And this is, I think, a source of great frustration for both groups. Policymakers want certainty, they want a prescription. They want researchers to tell them, this is the problem, this is the solution to the problem that has been posed to us, and go forth and do the good things that we need to do. And policymakers are supposed to just deliver on that. The problem is that, unfortunately, science is messy. The problems are messy. There is very rarely a clear, unambiguous answer to the kinds of problems that policymakers are solving. Which doesn't mean that there isn't an answer at all. I mean, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. Scientists are by very nature, they are conservative, they are concerned about precision, they are concerned about what is known and what is not known. So no scientist would ever tell you that X causes Y. They are more likely to tell you that there is a high likelihood that X causes Y, but there is a small chance that maybe Z causes Y. Now this is maddening and frustrating to policymakers because they are trying to propagate a policy which is all about X and Y. And they don't want to hear about Z and B and C and D. Now, scientists be true to their profession. And I think this is really a problem about different languages. We are all saying the same thing. Scientists, in fact, believe that X and Y are very deeply connected, and in fact, if you focus on X, it will affect Y. But they are reluctant to come out and make a blanket prescription. And this is, I think, the real problem with climate change research. Climate change skeptics have manipulated and have essentially, basically focused on the chink in the armor of scientific language, where they said, well, nobody there says that for sure, or 100% that X causes Y. Therefore, we can cheerfully sort of propose that X and Y are not related. If it doesn't cause, if X doesn't always cause Y, even if it causes Y 99% of the time, but not 1% of the time, then it means, and some of the debate is fascinating to me when I hear what very respected politicians, and I don't want to just focus on the US, but the US presidential primaries are now going on, and it's actually very interesting to see the kind of argument that is being made by otherwise extremely intelligent people who should know better. So, first thing I would like to say that I think it's important for policymakers to accept a certain level of ambiguity. It will never be the case where a scientist will come out and tell you that this is all it is. That that humans are the major cause, are the only cause of global warming. Because if you use that standard, you're not going to be able to move forward, and there are always going to be people who are going to say that there are other reasons. So that I think is important to educate both groups. I think policymakers need to accept that good policy can be made with a certain degree of uncertainty. You don't need to be 100% sure to have a good policy. The world is in itself uncertain. Policy prescriptions hope to do the right thing most of the time, not all of the time. So that I think is a change that needs to come, and I would like to request our Honourable Minister and Samarthai to maybe in fact educate their peers that the standard of proof needs to be a little bit more realistic. And also I think our friends in the media, because our media friends often jump on this sort of any kind of a gap and say, look, they don't all agree, therefore, we don't need to worry about it. At the same time, I think Samarthai picked up on a very important point. Scientists are horrible communicators, and I say that being part of the community, we need to communicate better, we need to be clear, we need to know our audience. In our audience of our peers, we can talk all about the confidence intervals, the degree of uncertainty. When we are talking to a lay audience, an audience which is not comfortable with this vocabulary, we need to be clear about what we're saying, because otherwise we will be misinterpreted, and there is always an issue of different agendas. So I think it's important that scientists know who they're talking to and when they're talking to who they're talking to. And I think it's very important that that the real message doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And a lot of what Gobeshona is in fact trying to do is in fact educate young people. And I'm very happy that I think I brought up this issue about the young. The young are our future. We are facing an existential crisis. If we don't get it right, there is no plan B. Much as I would like to travel to whatever planet is the closest to Earth in terms of water availability, I doubt that I will be able to do so or anybody else in this audience. So we have to get it right. And to get it right, we must get the research done. And if the research isn't done, we're not going to be able to get it right. So I think never before in history is research more important than it is now. So let me thank Dr. Salimul Haq, Dr. Atif Rahman, and their colleagues and the whole ICAR team for basically supporting and making this whole focus on research not a one-off thing, but a sustainable, long-term initiative which is fully supported by Independent University of Bangladesh. And I want to take this chance to give a big hand of applause to the whole ICAR team for demonstrating that Bangladesh can do science and can do it right. And that science is a process, it's not a one-off, it's not a, we don't know what the solutions are, but we can ask the right questions to move towards the right answer. Now, let me just use a couple of minutes to talk about migration, because this is an issue that's come up quite a few times in the conference and also in the comments made by several speakers. And one of my favorite quotes, I'm a demographer, so migration is very close to my heart. It's something that I think about a lot, both professionally. But I'm also a psychiatrist, so I have to tell you this is a quote not from a demographer, but from a psychiatrist, one of the most eminent psychoanalysts in the US, who happens to be of Indian origin, Salman Akhtar, who said in a very famous article, this is an article about psychoanalysis and about assimilation and about people migrating and assimilating. And he said, and I quote, "Migration is a journey from one imagined place to another." And the point he was trying to make is whenever you talk to migrants, they always tell you about a halcyon past where everything was fantastic and, as he put it, where the young respected the old and the old nurtured the young and there was no drug, sex, and rock and roll. And he says it's never the case that they'll tell you that they are happy where they are. Yet, if you ask them, and there's a duality here because migration is also a story of hope. No one migrates because they think they're going to get to a worse future. They always migrate because they want a better future, a better world. And yes, sometimes they are pushed into migrating, sometimes they are pulled. The push-pull dichotomy, it's not very, very different because obviously you need both. You need the hope, but the thing with migration is driven by hope. So I don't think we should be scared about the possibility of mass migration. If structurally it happens, it will happen. The world has huge resources. I'm someone who, like Dr. said, is very, very optimistic about the ability of the world to accommodate major crises. And I think it is, there's a lot of fear-mongering and scaremongering that goes on about the so-called security threats of climate change. And it all has to do with, oh my God, the sea level is going to rise a meter and all of Bangladesh is going to move into India. So India must build a fence to make sure that this doesn't happen. First of all, that is unlikely to be a sustainable solution, no matter what Mr. Donald Trump thinks about keeping out the Mexicans by building a wall across southern US. I don't think other countries are very enamored of this possibility, but I think it's an unlikely one. This is not to say that this is something we want. Obviously, if you can prevent migration because of climate change, that is the desired result. But I think as Salim pointed out, if it should come to pass, it is certainly not the end of the world, and it may be the path to a better future. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rappan, for your reflections and guidance. With this, the closing session comes to an end. On behalf of ACAD IUB, I would like to thank you all for being here and engaging in the sessions and conference. I would like to now invite you to the certificate award ceremony, which will be followed by dinner at 6:30. So I hope that you do join us for that. Thank you all.
Thank you.